So this is a presentation that I came up with from live customers to ask me questions like, hey, how can I pass the penetration test?
And they go for the easy button.
Well, of course. And this guy, again, is not a technical guy. He's wearing a suit.
And every time you go for the easy button, God deploys another bot on your network.
That's right.
That's one of John's favorites.
Oh my gosh. Did you lie to our audience, CJ?
I did. It's not that kind of test. And it's sort of a social engineering fish, right? Reels you in. It's like cramming for a medical blood test or the dental exam by flossing a bunch the 2 weeks right before. You might get the wrong result. Maybe you're trying to get the executives to give you more resources. So if you do a bunch of crazy shortcut things to try and look good, it may backfire on you. The other thing is there's no silver bullet. Everyone wants to buy the fast, easy tool. It's not. It's all hard work. And that's what the next slide kind of goes to. Shortcuts may not help you. Never worked out for Wile E. Coyote.
He tried.
He tried.
He tried.
He tried and he tried. He's like a cat. He had more than 9 lives. The essential conditions for success are basically hard work, long-term focus, and a positive learning attitude. That's something BHIS advocates.
You really can't approach your test as an adversarial test. You can't have it be like us versus the pen testing firm.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, and we do have customers, potential customers, that come in with that type of crappy attitude. It's like we start asking some general questions like, well, we thought you would figure that out.
Oh
no, sorry, we're not going to do the circus pen test. If you want the Hollywood style hacker, that's not us. If you want the hacker that's like, we could show up and completely destroy your life, that's not us either. So with the right attitude that's basically working back and forth and collaborative is so much more effective.
Absolutely. Joff talks about, he goes, do you want to test the pen tester or do you want to test your security?
Those are two different
things. And we're here to teach and learn. You know, not here to like pwn and break.
We identified that, you did that in our SWOT analysis, that what we are is an education firm.
Honestly, that's probably more of what
more than a pen testing firm. We're here to educate about
when we
security.
pen test, we're there to educate you about your network and your state of security. So it's kind of interesting. It was a kind of a ground shifter for us. So I lied to you, as John so clearly pointed out. Is there any good news? And the answer is yes. There's best practice. Okay, this has been done before. Thousands and thousands of companies and people are out there doing good work in establishing what works. The vendors are, everyone is. So go with that. Lessons learned. We're going to talk at the end of this presentation about a couple of hacking experiences that Black Hills has had. And those kind of lessons learned are things you want to learn from other people. Go to cons. Go see what's successful. Listen to blogs, listen to webcasts.
Join Twitter.
The stuff's out there. Twitter's got it.
Even though Twitter is such a cesspool sometimes, there's
well,
a lot of
you keep it really focused.
I've loved the mute functionality in
it's
Twitter.
Awesome.
Because there are people like, this conversation is horrible. Mute it.
Yeah, and I don't want to listen to you. I just want it to be about InfoSec. That's it.
Yeah.
Like,
especially the past couple of weeks, it's been pretty hard.
Yes, agreed.
But the bottom line is, BHIS and our sister firms and people like us, SANS Institute, CIS, we're on your side. We're there to help you. So.
And this is also the time that someone asked, how do you find a good firm? Unless that's later. I think it was around here.
But do talk about your teacher analysis, because that's when I...
Teacher analysis?
Your metaphor
Student
for teachers and
Logan.
students about Logan and...
Oh, yeah. So whenever you're looking at a firm, you know, it all kind of depends. Like we're talking about that pass-fail, right? We have some teachers at the school that have this idea of, this is what is responsible, your student is responsible for doing. They got to get it turned in. If they don't get it turned in, it's a 0, and the grade is what they get. And if they don't get it set up, then that's it. And then you also have some teachers that are like, I want you to redo it till you get it right. And you know, you turn an assignment, you get a 70, you can change some things, then you redo it, and you get better, and you improve. And the question is, what teacher do you think my son learns better from? And this is like everybody. If you give people the opportunity to kind of improve and get better, they will. Mm-hmm. So when we're testing, we give them a report. If it's bad, let's say it's a critical finding, which would be failure by almost any stretch of the imagination, we like to give people, what are some things that you can do in 4 or 5 steps that are going to get you to a much better rating the fastest, that low-hanging fruit that you can take care of. And then you can come back and say, okay, we fixed those things, retest it, and we adjust your score appropriately. We aren't in the game to be the really draconian teacher that's slapping your hand and saying you suck, because that doesn't work. And by the way, also we were talking about sister firms. A lot of the stuff that we talk about in this webcast that I know what's going to come later because we've already done it. It's weird. We're doing strange editing of the slides. We should actually do that. I wonder if we can do the shimmering thing. But good firms like InGuardians, good firms like Trusted Sec, good firms like Core with Deviant, good firms like Secure Ideas, SpecterOps absolutely is another good one. They'll do a lot of the exact same types of things in working with an organization.
So this all comes from the recent CIS Critical Security Controls Small and Mid-Size Enterprise Guide that just came out recently.
That's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. But the first part is know your environment. And what would a presentation be without a classic Sun Tzu quote over on the right? But well, my dad used to say, wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. And these are some fundamental truths that we need to know.
And this is very serendipitous. CJ was working on this presentation. He sent me the slides. And he's talking about know your environment, what's connected, what's your software. And Tara Wheeler, basically at almost the exact same time that you were working on this and sent this to me, tweeted out, asset management is information security. And I think it ties into that. If you don't know what you have, you cannot protect it, period.
Yeah, the unknown. How do you work with the unknown? You don't know. So what is connected to your network? What kind of software? All those things. And here's a big one that people kind of overlook. What is your key data and where is it?
Right? Yeah, and whenever we were working on the penetration testing execution standard, that's one of the things that we started with in pre-engagement negotiations, is what is critical to your organization. Unfortunately, and this is kind of creepy, a lot of our customers don't know. Like the security team is, we need a pen test. Well, what's most important to you? It's like, well, we don't know. What's sensitive when we get access to it? Well, we'll know it when you get it. And sometimes, like if we're pen testing a power company, you would think gaining access to the power grid would be the most sensitive thing. And we do that and they kind of yawn. But if we get access to their payroll information, how much people get paid and bonuses and things like that, then they lose their minds. So
my goodness.
A lot of it is trying to know exactly what it is that you're trying to protect and really being honest with yourself. And it's not PHI and PII and credit card data all the time.
Yep.
We have a couple questions that came in. So Terrell is asking, how can we audit the pen tester? There's lots of vendors. How can we, the industry, tell the difference between good and bad testers? Veil evasion for pen testers.
So this is easy, right? And we recommend firms, sister firms, all the time. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at Trusted Sec, you look at InGuardians, you look at Rendition, you look at Core with Deviant. If you look at these firms that traditionally do a fantastic job, and I would put SpecterOps, a new company, I don't mention them nearly enough, in this category, especially for C2, data exfiltration, lateral movement. If you look at the firms that are good, the firms that are good are constantly having people present at conferences. They're constantly doing webcasts. They're presenting at Black Hat. They're constantly giving back to the community again and again and again and again and again. Not just one big presentation once at Black Hat and then that's it. You see them constantly giving back. And that attitude of the company, if you're looking at Trusted Sec, Dave just released a new version of Social Engineering Toolkit. Dave doesn't make a dime off of Social Engineering Toolkit, and yet almost every pen testing firm in the universe uses that. You can trust that Trusted Sec is going to do a fantastic job. This is what they're giving away for free. InGuardians for years, Ed Scotus, Mike Poore, all those guys, JBO and Jimmy starting it up, that was one of the big things they always did, was presentations. So you can vet your company by looking at what they're giving back to the community. And the best companies are the ones that are giving the most back to the community.
Another good thing is to look at, and we do this, compare what the result, we give out a sample report. What do the results really look like? Can I see, an example of your work? And another one is do you get to see who the testers are? We don't do bait and switch. Our proposal, we list our testers with a short bio. Mm-hmm. And pen testing is part science and part art. The science is all the standards, the best practice, all those things. But there's an artist behind that putting it together. Who's your artist?
Yeah.
All right, so knowing what devices are connected, huge thing. And I hope that the quote on the right is not correct. Everything is connected and independent. We're in very big trouble, and we are in very big trouble.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that sums it up. Yeah.
But so, what do? On large networks, you need to be running scanning. You need to know what those devices are. Recommend DHCP logging, so you know what's been connected and when, and you can go back and recreate that. So you're controlling that with that methodology. Tracking those devices in a smaller organization. You might have to manually keep an inventory. Very small businesses, you know, a spreadsheet with your hardware, your software listed, and your data. Another thing to look at when you're doing this is what sort of cloud services are you using? Where's your data for that?
And we're right now my head is a little bit scattered, more scattered than normal. Working a hunt team, and this particular organization has tons of cloud services. And I don't think that they know what cloud services they're actually using. For example, there's a large contingency of this organization that is using a cloud printing service. I don't know how this cloud printing magic works, but they're actually sending files to this cloud printing service. Things are getting printed and then they're getting delivered. It's like a FedEx type thing. So you can send your documents, it gets printed, and then it shows up to where you want it to go. But instead of using FedEx or something like that, you can use this service. And we're seeing tons of data that's going to this particular service.
Proprietary.
So we have no idea what they're printing. We don't know if it's proprietary data, what services are being
Going
used.
into the bin.
Just a surprise for everybody.
All the data.
So for smaller organizations that need cheap and free solutions, there's some things down there, the things that you can use: Nmap, ZenMap, Spiceworks. Always look out there. Commercial solutions for the bigger companies, you need Qualys for your web stuff, and you need commercial scanning for a distributed scanning environment. But for small guys, go with the free, easy solutions. Learn to use them. If you don't use those things, you'll learn a ton about your network from.
Or if you do use those things, yeah.
So there's a question about this slide. Jeremy said we have some security concerns about Spiceworks since they have switched to cloud-based account requirements.
And that's okay. So the whole thing about cloud-based accounts and requirements, every single vendor is moving that way. And I want to explain just a couple seconds why, and why we have to get used to it, even though it makes all of us in the industry feel really uggy, right? So almost every vendor is moving to the point of trying to get all of their stuff in the cloud. And it's not that they're intentionally trying to screw over their customers or make their data less secure, but a lot of the investors, they like to make sure that the company has complete control where their software is. So let's use something like Tenable Nessus. Nessus can be installed anywhere, and you run into problems with people running versions of Nessus that their license keys have been expired, or they haven't updated in a long time, and you run into problems. By moving into the cloud, you have control over the license keys, and you also have control over the update process. So that gives the financial people a tremendous incentive to do that, because it takes the cost of developing that product down. Now, all that being said, from a security perspective, it's a nightmare. Right? Insecure S3 buckets, sharing data out the backside. The virus total stuff is a really great example of that with some of the security vendors. And as much as that makes us uncomfortable, the fact is it's where everything is going to go. And while I agree with you, I think that that's something we don't want to be doing. It is still something that we have to get more comfortable with, because it's just the way the world is now, unfortunately. So I know that didn't answer your question, but it's just
okay.
Kind of a sad thing.
It's good to know. So Jason says, can you pen test a cloud-based rapid application development SaaS solution, or are you stuck letting them say they are secure?
So what you do in that situation is you request a letter of attestation from them. So if you're using a third party, if they won't let you test your data in that app, then you ask for a letter of attestation from their vendor that does their penetration tests, stating that they've been tested and the risk was acceptable. And just hope it's not like a Big 5 auditing firm that seems to be going down the drain fairly quickly the past couple of weeks.
Testifying in front of Congress and such.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some other questions, but we can get to them later. So, but I haven't ignored you guys.
So software, other part of the question, in the equation, know your software, have those inventories, know what you're using, start restricting that. Do you let people download any old app they want? This goes for mobile devices connected. If your mobile devices are connecting to sensitive corporate information, maybe you shouldn't be allowing just every old app to run. So restricting that a bit. Admins having separate accounts is a huge one.
And that one, we run across that so many times. Yeah. Like you get an admin account, now you own the entire domain. And they're surfing the internet, they're checking files on a server, they're playing video games, all as an admin account.
Well, the other one, and I'm jumping ahead to kind of the BHIS lessons learned, having separate accounts. I know that Derek did a pivot, and in the first 45 minutes, he had the user account, but the admin also used their user account for their privileged user password, and so
same password, even though they were separate accounts.
Same password, same hash.
Admin?
Yeah. Admin.
So, no, it was
It
actually
was user admin.
it was something we broke quickly, so it must have been 8 characters.
Summer 2017.
Too easy. Limiting the number of privileged accounts, least privilege, everyone's an admin. Everyone can administer their own workstation. That's going to create a problem. So cost-effective solutions, there's some of the app locker built into Microsoft, Netrix, and Open Audit. Getting that inventory, again, knowing what you've got out there, knowing what that you're trying to patch, knowing what your challenges are. And just like the gentleman who researched the tool, sometimes you see something and you're like, I better go do some research on that. I don't even know what that is.
So Jeremy says, how do you segregate IT staff's everyday work from admin work? VMs, separate boxes on separate networks?
A lot of different organizations do different things. The one that seems to work the best that I see organizations do is anytime they do administrative tasks, they have a jump host. So they basically RDP into a server that is specifically allowed to like the logins for their administrator accounts are allowed to log in from that particular computer system, and then they can do their jobs. And they work from that particular host. Their standard workstation, however, is their standard user account. That's where they do their email, that's where they do their standard web surfing, that's where they can do some of their research. But any admin functionality, they pivot to a jump host, usually via RDP. They do what they need to do as an administrator, and then they get out.
All right, next category, protecting your assets. When we're talking about the money, protecting your data, but what data is actually valuable? Where's the real value? And being clear on that. Having the right anti-malware. I'm not going to say, I hate that, the right anti-malware software.
And that's such a loaded, I mean, that's a whole webcast in and of itself.
Yeah, we've
done
that too.
And we'll talk more about some of the things that are working right now. But what we're finding out, since we were talking to Derek quite a bit this week, because he's done some amazing things. But this week, or last week, he got into a difficult penetration test that he was working on. And we're going to talk about some lessons learned from that. And what we're finding out is you can have a really good anti-malware solution, next generation endpoint security product, AI, whatever. Stops all the things. And you can bypass that. But whenever you couple that with really, really good controls of like PowerShell and scripts and command line access and whitelisting, and you have educated users, that's the ticket right there.
And educating the users, that big one, like SANS, securing the human.
Mm-hmm.
These are big ticket items too that get you a lot of bang for the buck. So configuring a secure baseline, something that's definitely not easy to do because it's so tailored. We've had people, in fact, I did a blog on being a defensive specialist. It's so difficult because you've got to know the business environment and the specific needs, and it changes within environments. So looking up a secure configuration from a guide is one thing, but knowing how to apply it and use it, that takes your local knowledge.
Yeah.
And
you also have to understand whenever you're trying to implement like secure operating systems or secure browsers, that a lot of the guides are created by people that have absolutely no idea how it works on a day-to-day basis. So if you have a recommendation, one of the things that's easy to jump to from a conclusions perspective is making the assumption that the people that came out with the guide knew what they're doing, and you can't do that. I remember, you remember the old, like the disk-to-stigs and the gold disks,
yeah,
where if you hit remediate all vulnerabilities, you couldn't even log into the system anymore. I mean, it basically reduced it to a boat anchor, but that was DISA doing their thing and making our life difficult. So don't make an assumption that these people know from a day-to-day perspective how these things need to work. So take everything with a grain of salt, implement what you can, and let go what you have to.
Interestingly, the STIG said, if you do all this, you will break
your system, which I think they put in after the fact. They're like, oops, too far. Well, here's a disclaimer. We're good.
Bridge too far.
Yeah.
So other ones are your malware. Having that at least as a layer of defense is essential. So we poo-poo. I feel like we kind of down malware, but it's an essential piece of the puzzle. It's not the piece of the puzzle. Yeah. Limiting use of removable media. This one's kind of brilliant to me. Like we use that. Everyone can write to a thumb drive because it's so convenient. Do they really need it? So again, that speaks to your environment. What's the risk? How valuable is your intellectual property?
Should people bring their own computers?
Well, bring your own device. That's a bunch of stuff. Sure. Multi-factor authentication. That's the magical incantation for getting multi-factor authentication. This is something we use, a lot of people use. Again, it's not a bomb-proof thing. It's not perfect,
Well,
but it is good.
It is not bomb-proof. And in fact, at Wild West Hack and Fest, we'll be talking about ways that you can bypass two-factor authentication with Google. Mike will be doing that presentation. So people are like, what?
Mike Felch and
Oh,
Bo
yeah,
Bullock.
yeah. Mike and Bo are going to be presenting on that. We've seen it. It is
Going to
frighteningly
break the
cool.
internet.
So come check that out.
Better come check that out.
We still have tickets.
We do.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Now we pause for a brief commercial.
Wild West Hack and Fest.
Hackers, viruses, never mind.
You'll know when I post it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Changing default passwords for default accounts. I don't know why I had to put this one in there. To me, it's kind of like having to put patching in there.
But you gotta put
we get it all the time. The question is, why do we still find that? They're hard to find. I worked in the Intel community, and we were all the way to our red team penetration test, and the pen test team found one on a very heavily engineered system, and we were just like,
we missed that one.
we missed it.
Just one.
There were only thousands to find, but we did miss that one. Proper use of encryption, you know, having encryption is one thing, implementing it properly is another one. So these are things you have, that's why I say none of these are easy steps. There's homework on every one of these things. You can mess them up quite easily. So here's some cost-effective solutions. Just throw these things out for you to look. On my blog, I'd said Google it. I have actual examples for you.
And I also know that people are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, BitLocker can be bypassed with this, and FileVault can be bypassed with this, and Qualys isn't the best browser check, and there's a better one over here, and OpenVAS isn't nearly as good as Rapid7 Nextpost. But I think that the key theme for this is free.
There's lots of them, too.
There's lots of them. So you may have something better, and that's great, but there's also a lot of people that don't even know where to begin. And this is a great place to kind of start if your budget is zero.
And you can check these and see what are the competitors for these. Yeah, don't take these as verbatim or an endorsement, but it is a starting place to look. And having one of these things is better than not having it.
Yeah.
Something I just started using was the Qualys browser check.
Just to check
I
your
just
browser.
picked it up to just patch it up, and it looks at your plugins and things. I was just like, and it found a bunch of stuff. I was like, yes, I should have been.
Well, browser plugins are right now, Matt Hussein is working on a browser plugin based backdoor that does all the stuff inside the browser.
Why is everybody so scary?
Yeah, well, Matt's nice. You meet Matt,
No, Matt's
like,
super
Matt's
nice,
super
but
great.
they're all doing
He's
scary
like,
things.
I just wrote a thing that will backdoor your system. So that is actually a big deal, right? Because it's one of those areas that isn't being talked about nearly as much as it should be. And having the ability to check your browser is a good thing all the way across the board.
Oh yeah, there's a ton that goes on there. So cyber secure behaviors. So the first people to train is your sysadmins from the security staff perspective. Training the users is very important, but how about the sysadmins, the database admins, the developers? Have they been trained? Have they bought into the culture that security is important? It's almost your first battle, although sometimes, and I've seen it plenty of times, that the penetration test is a tool that opens that door to a culture change. So,
well, and we try really hard to do like training before we even get there, and I know that you give links to previous training that we've done publicly. So we have pen test preparations for web applications, pen test preparations for external network assessments, pen test preparations for C2 Pivot, and we do that because, to be quite honest, we don't want to document the same things again and again and again and again. So a lot of times you can train these custodians cheaply or free online with tons of videos, and do that before you even hire a pen testing firm. Because your pen testing firm should not, their main goal in life should not be getting as many shells as possible. It should be making the organization more secure. And we can do that before the test even begins to make the test that much better.
Yep. Then you get to training the users, especially on phishing and social engineering. Get people to trust their spidey senses. Everyone sees that. Oh, I kind of thought that was it seemed like a fish. It was a fish. If it seems wrong, at least investigate.
The email said free candy, and it was a picture of a creepy conversion van. What made you think you could click on it?
The mystery machine?
It seemed weird. Yeah,
It seems weird, but then I clicked on it anyway.
They didn't get free candy. So.
Passphrases. This one's a huge one, and this is a game breaker to actually use long passwords. And I've been harping on this forever. Correct horse battery staple.
But don't use that one.
That's a bad one. Yeah, that will be in the
concept is good, but don't use that one.
The long passwords when we're pivoting, if you want that shortcut to really harass our testers, do that, because 8-character passwords, child's play. NIST just changed to how many? 20.
I can't remember.
It's huge. Remove the complexity requirements. Just let people use.
They were
words.
upstaged by Cosmo Teen, so they had to up their game.
Cosmo Teen made 20-character passwords.
They said long passwords and use two-factor everywhere.
Oh.
So they were telling teenage girls, predominantly teenage girls, the better, stronger password policies than NIST. So
nice.
Maybe they were on a webcast, so that's
maybe they were on a webcast. That would be awesome.
We have a bunch of questions, but I don't know if you want to get through and then answer them or answer them
What
as
are we looking
go.
like?
We're doing fine with time.
All
Let's
right.
answer some
It's
now.
half an hour.
Let's have some questions.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to some of these. They're just kind of general ones. So Tim says, one of the hardest things I've encountered in my career is not the technical aspect of being an engineer, but dealing with leadership teams. How do you get a leadership team who sees no perceived value in security team to understand the importance of having a pen test before it's too late?
I'd recommend wait it out. Those people will be fired before too long.
Show them the news.
Yeah.
Ask them how Target's senior staff is. Ask them how
Equifax is probably a good one. And honestly, so all joking aside, the news is probably the most important. It's probably the best one.
Mm-hmm.
And also with that, what you can do is, and we talk about this in SANS 504 all the time, is the touchstone for information security in your organization should be you. You should be doing webcasts regularly if you have a company that's spread all over the place. You should be doing brown bag lunches. You should have people come and ask you questions. You need to be that security expert.
Advocate,
absolutely. If your executives are getting all of their news from USA Today or the Washington Post or whatever, then you're kind of sucking at your job. So this isn't something that you just show up and you say, leverage, synergy, and all of a sudden they're like, yes, he did the magical incantation. It takes this persistence of effort of doing it like every single month and constantly, and you're not going to see it in 2 months. It's going to take a very, very long time. But after you become that security expert, you're the one that's going to be invited to the table, but it requires you reaching out, talking about basic things, password link, don't click on links from strangers. It requires you to share news stories with the executives and the rest of the organization to become that touchstone. Because otherwise, they're getting all of their news and information from vendors. They're getting all of their news and information from crappy security websites online that are pushing vendors, or they're getting it from the news, which is wrong most of the time.
I remember talking about the 8th layer of the 7-layer model was always politics. There's actually 3 above it, but work on being both effective and keep that long-term focus. You may not win quickly, but keep at it and be effective. When their eyes start to glaze over, you stop, or you got to change your tactic.
Pull out the laser pointer and start running it against the back wall, and they'll start watching it like a cat. It just takes time.
Oh, man.
Another question?
Sure. So Sahil says, what can application developers, not specifically security folks, do to develop software while developing software used to improve security?
So that was the pen test preparations. Hopefully we can send out that link. We have pen test preparations for application developers. And we show them kind of like this. It's kind of a high level so you get ready, but that kind of focuses in on web app developers, on using free and open source tools like Zed Attack Proxy and Nikto to find vulnerabilities in your web apps before the pen tester even gets there. The goal is to make sure that that's something that's part of the SDLC every single day. Not at a gate that it's being ran by a handful of people, but every developer has those tools in-house to do it constantly. So we'll send out the link for that webcast too.
I send out that link to probably about 10% that ask about
And we're getting cleaner tests for it too. I mean, it's awesome whenever they're like, yeah, we had a month before you guys got here. We ran this, we cleaned up all the low-hanging fruit. That's great. Before we walk through the door, that's what we want.
That's the magic thing.
So then Timothy says, when setting up a pen test, I'm asked to provide IP counts, which is used to estimate the engagement. Can you talk about the value of counts versus the ability to penetrate the zone regardless of counts?
So the reason why we use counts is basically it's a rough order of magnitude. It's not like we charge $1.50 per IP address. But whenever we're pen testing a company, if we're talking to them on the phone and they say that they have 100 IPs in their organization, and we talk to another company and they say they have 10,000, 100,000, 150,000, those are different rough orders of magnitude. And we need to get some idea of what we're actually going to be dealing with. It also depends on the test too.
So like beds in a hospital.
Kind of like beds in a hospital.
It doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you a rough size of like how many people they deal with.
And that's a fair question. I know some pen test firms are like, that's stupid. They're idiots. I have no problem arguing with pen testing firms about that. But every single pen test, you have to have some idea of the rough order of magnitude. So like that one that we did that's coming up, it's like 1 million IP addresses. Okay, yeah, you're not going to price that out the same.
3 days.
3 days. 1 million IP addresses. 3 days. We got this. You're not going to do that the same as like a small law firm. So That's a rough order of magnitude. It's not a per cost per IP address. It's just giving an idea of the size of the organization, points of presence, things of that nature. Just scope it out correctly.
We can do a black box red team where you say, here's my company name, come get us. We'll do that.
Yeah.
And we're not going to tell you how many IP addresses.
Don't care. We'll find it.
Yeah, and that's okay too. But that also is up the maturity curve, right?
Way
So
up.
if we're starting with a company that's never had anything done before, we're starting with a vulnerability scan because there's no reason to jump to a black box pen test. They need to know what their assets are, what vulnerabilities exist, build it up. So we have some customers now that we've pen tested so many times that now we've gone into a bug bounty type cycle where they're like, you come in and you find cross-site scripting will pay you this, you find SQL injection will pay you this, you get a user to click a link, we'll pay you this, and it's changed that dynamic. But they're way up here on the maturity curve. They're not just getting started.
Right.
Cool. So Brian says, once you've taken detailed inventory of what's on your network, what are some ways to alert a new unknown device? I've heard of companies doing static IP reservations for all known devices and then alert on devices that pull from DHCP pool.
And that's fine. You can basically pull that off of MAC address, and the organizational unique identifier, I think it's the first 3 bytes, will identify the manufacturer. You can do that. The other way to make it a little bit easier is there's 2 different approaches. One of them is Nessus's or Tenable's passive vulnerability scanner. It sets at the edge of your network, and when traffic's leaving your network, it does user agent string analysis and IP address and records what is this user agent string, what is the operating system identification fingerprint, and it'll let you know what vulnerabilities and new devices show up on the egress points. You can do something very similar with Bro, because we really like Bro a lot. Bro is awesome, although they're going to be changing their name because of the Bro culture. Yeah. So they're changing their name.
That was
Bro.
Hilarious.
But that was Big Brother, but now they're like, well, because it's associated with Bro culture, we want to change it. So they're changing their name. But Bro is awesome because if it's sniffing, it can also do an asset inventory of user agent strings and IP addresses as well. So you can do a lot of that stuff passively.
God.
Scott
So
says,
cool.
no. Okay, Emmy has a question. Are all pen testing exclusively technology oriented? What about ones that cover social engineering? After all, humans are the weakest link.
We do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think most pen testing, I mean, that
depends
can
on
be
the
part
scope.
of what you want.
Yeah,
Like
and
you
we
say,
have.
I want social engineering.
But CJ, we also have a lot of customers who are like, don't do social engineering. And we're like, why? Because we know it's going to work.
Because we're going to fail.
You know what? Here's a workstation. Just start there. Let's assume that a user's going to click a link, and that's fine too. But it all depends on what the customer's looking for. It also goes to that maturity scale level too.
At the risk of getting in trouble with my boss, social engineering is one of those things. I love to see it engaged in the physical stuff within a red team. But to just do social engineering testing when you know that your people are going to fail, like that's a lot of money.
It takes a lot, and it's way more time than you would maybe think. Like, so this is a bunch of phone calls, right?
No, many phone calls.
We got to set it up. We got to like have 2 people usually. I mean, having been involved in all those,
having the 2 people is a huge part because if I'm on a social engineering engagement with you, you know that I made these calls, we can kind of collaborate with the story. So if the user on the other side says, John made all kinds of horrible comments and cussed at me, it was like, no, that never happened. Because users do get hurt sometimes.
That
like,
they've been
pwned. They're like, they kind of snap a little bit. But yeah, it takes a lot more time than people expect.
Okay. Get back to the slides.
So what?
Slides.
What happened?
Oh, we have slides.
Oh, do you want to get back to the slides?
Let's go back. We'll come back and do some more.
Sure, let's do it. We can have more, but we'll get it at the end.
Cost-effective solutions. These are a bunch of things. Look what I put at the top.
There we go. Webcasts.
Blogs and web class. The SANS newsletter. I don't know if I get the Ouch newsletter. I get the news feed.
Unfortunately, SANS Ouch and a lot of those for people, they get them, but they have a filter that sends them over someplace because there's so many
images.
Too many. It's like SANS Ouch, the SANS News Bites, the SANS What Works. There's just all of them, and they're all good. It's just it can be overwhelming sometimes.
You got to pick one though. You got to stay up on what's going on, and that's kind of how I do it. Phishing and training. We've been doing some work with Know-Before. Some people love it, some people hate it. There's a ton of those out there, so I could have filled up 10 slides with the phishing platforms. We're big advocates of you phishing yourselves. Don't just come to us to get a click rate. You should be doing ongoing phishing training, or we'll do a phishing campaign ongoing for you, but that's essential. So prepare your organization. Again, here we go. Are your critical files backed up? When and where? This is new, right? This is just because of where. But this has been out there forever, and it's another thing we don't do right.
Well, and it's also not something that can be tested by a pen testing firm. Like, we want you to break into our system and encrypt all of our files. We totally can. In fact, I think we have a blog post on how to do that. But people don't generally like pen testing firms shutting operations down. It's something that's generally frowned upon. So a lot of this doesn't get tested the way that it actually should be
But
tested.
the place for this is, if we're pen testing you, you should be backed up.
Yeah.
You never know when something gets knocked over. So also for the incident, we do a service for incident response and preparation, but that's something for your general cyber hygiene, is having that incident response. Here's what you can do on that. Having that unplugged backup option, the tape that you pull out, if you're a home or small business user, the thumb driver out of your computer, you get malware and it's really insidious and gets to your backups, at least you have a backup somewhere you can go back to.
Sorry.
Here's cost-effective solutions for those backups. Again, hardly comprehensive.
Yeah, and this is more like if you're a small organization, you
Yes.
need something. This is great.
Big
if you're a large
organizations?
enterprise, if you're on this webcast, you have 100,000 users, and you're like, crap, backup. We need to get started.
That's
Oh no.
Oh no.
I did better now than later.
Absolutely, better now than never. Today's a great time to get started.
all right.
Okay,
Lessons from the
so
field.
I'll take this one. So a couple of quick things. First, whenever we're talking about these things that we do, good firms, the other good firms do the exact same thing. I don't want this to come across as a commercial. There are other great firms out there, like I mentioned, Trusted Sec, SpectraRock, Secure Ideas, Layer of Security. There's a bunch of them. We talk about these firms all the time. So these are consistent themes that you see across the board. The other thing is, a lot of firms like to discuss and say that they can always get in and everything's always completely vulnerable, and that's not true. I want to be able to stand up as a pen testing firm and say, look, there are things that we come across where we get skunked. Like, we had a test that Derek was on. Dude got skunked, and it's not because Derek doesn't know what he's doing. He's very, very good at what he does, but they do an amazing job. So first, reduced external attack surface, two-factor everywhere. If you have Outlook web access or anything like that, make sure it's behind a VPN. So you have to authenticate before you can get access to the sensitive resources. Don't ever allow something that's directly connected to Active Directory be directly connected to the internet, like Delay and Equifax. But don't do that, right? These services should not be directly accessible, right? So using a VPN is great. And we also have some customers that are using deception technologies on their VPN.
So
it's a fake VPN server, and we bang on it and they laugh.
So Derek's was even more deceptive.
Where do you get this?
We learned it looked like you could just try a password, and you couldn't. It was two-factor. So when they kept trying it, they kept getting blacklisted. He said he burned through 80 IPs.
Yeah, before they actually. Then we used another tool to basically. That's a long story. But that's cool,
guys.
right?
Good job.
You know, that's awesome.
ADHD-ish.
This is crap we talk about. You know, ADHD.
It's
That's cyber
working, it's
deception.
working.
It works,
It
right?
totally. And
they
look at our
laugh.
tester. Look at Derek.
Just so happy. Multiple endpoint controls. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's not a product that you can purchase. We very rarely see Carbon Black or Cylance or CrowdStrike in high enforcement mode, where it's doing full whitelisting and it's doing the heuristics and the behavioral analytics. Mm-hmm. But if you can actually get to the point where you have a restricted desktop, we can't get cmd.exe, we can't get PowerShell, we can't run C# applications. You're doing whitelisting based on directory where things execute. So we can't execute from downloads, we can't execute from temporary folders, and you're using an advanced endpoint security product. That's the ticket. It's not just a product, but it's also the configuration of the organization in addition to that.
And then monitoring of all that.
Oh, and then watching it too.
And then that site Derek was at, I think he said there's only 4 workstations that could even run PowerShell. Now that won't work everywhere. Some people depend on
And
that.
you had to jump host to those systems to do that.
And those were the 4 that you could do it. It was just,
you were locked down.
and the guy in the upper right corner there is not a pen tester. Do you know why, John?
Why?
He's wearing a tie.
Yeah, Sierra. That's our social engineer over there.
So these become things that we look for, and whenever we see that, it's a celebration. I've talked about this in the past. This customer we just tested, we have a Honey Badger award.
Did we give them one?
We're going to give
They're
them, they're going to get a Honey Badger award, yeah. And we only handed it out a handful of times, but thankfully we're seeing more and more customers that are deserving of the Honey Badger award. But once again, it shouldn't be something like, we couldn't break in and we suck.
That's the response.
And because there's feeling.
That's how they feel like, and I'm fine with that because, you know, that's how they get their self-affirmation. But at the end of the day, you only have so much time. And if you have a company that's doing a lot of these things, like very reduced external footprint, two-factor authentication everywhere, firewalls between the workstations to shut down lateral movement, okay, they deserve it. So we got this Honey Badger award, and I sent Sierra out to find the most gaudy, horrible frame we can find.
It actually looks cool. I don't know that I couldn't really find something horrible, but it
just depends.
It's goofy. It's goofy enough, but it still looks cool.
It's hard. So. It depends on what's at the thrift store. Whenever we go find the frame.
But there's a book out there called Ego is the Enemy, and that response to the pen tester that I'm a failure. But this is a security success. This is what our customers have worked long and hard to get to this point where you're stumped.
I'm just seeing more and more customers that are at that level.
It's a great thing.
Leveling up.
Well, and it is cool because we'll test companies for 3 years and then we hand them over to like Dave at Trusted, and then they'll call me up and be like, "What the hell did you do to these people?" And we do the same thing.
You're
and
welcome.
That's cool. That's great.
So the conclusion is, hey, there are 3 steps, but they're not easy. And for someone I've got a pen test coming up in a month. You got a lot of work to do. It's questionable if you can do that. So.
Start flossing. Now.
Start flossing.
So should we go
Let's do some questions.
Of the more questions. Okay, so Ahmed says scanning in Amazon AWS is limited on what you can do for penetration tests. What challenges do you usually run into, and what do you require from the customer to provide you?
You can get a permission statement from Amazon. It depends on what you're testing. If you're just testing standard AMIs, don't test that. If you're testing just standard AMIs and servers, you're going to be fine. You can go and you can scan all you want. You can do whatever you want. But if you're actually using Amazon services like Kinesis or S3 buckets and you want to attack that Amazon infrastructure directly, that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
So know what it is they're actually using in Amazon, and then basically get permission from Amazon to test what you can and stay away from the things that you cannot.
We'll verify that at the ROE too. That's something we're right on. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeremy says, have you attacked Microsoft's ATA? Any experience with it from an attacker or defender side?
Okay, so there's been a lot of presentations lately with advanced threat analytics from Microsoft for user behavioral analytics. I know Rob Fuller, Nubix, has been doing some research and a number of cons lately. There have been papers talking about how to attack it, how it uses DHCP for actually tracking assets and where those assets are and what they're doing and things of that nature. So there's plenty of presentations out there for that. The cool thing about Microsoft is a lot of the things that are discovered, Microsoft fixes relatively quickly, and that's great. So even though there are ways to bypass Exabeam, advanced threat analytics, and user behavioral analytics from like Rapid7 and some of the other products that are out there, these vendors are getting better. And I really think that behavioral analytics is going to be key moving forward. But yes, there are ways to actually bypass those things. Like I said, Rob Fuller has done some testing, and I also know that there's some other public presentations on attacking and bypassing advanced threat analytics out there. It's not a silver bullet. It's awesome. When it's used in unison with other things, it's very, very deadly to a tester.
When you're raising that bar, just remember, you're eliminating a huge part of the people who would attack you. Okay, so the Chinese and the NSA can do it, great. But when you've raised the bar that high, you've cut the odds of you guys having a bad event.
So Grant asks, what sources should we be using to pass along to executives? There is so much information. Is there a good consolidated source?
Our blog. Our blog seems good. Yeah. Also,
commercial.
There's a lot of
marketing.
Not just our blog, but there's just standard security websites out there. I know Register Security does a really good job. Some of it's a little bit snarky from time to time, but you know, just the standard Twitters. Follow people like Malware Jake is a good one. SubT is a good one. So there's a lot of people that are constantly giving news stories back into it. But no, honestly, watch the breaches and report on the breaches to management. How did it happen? How can we make sure that we don't have the same thing happen to us? Adjusting our incident response procedures moving forward in the future to address this type of incident, not the specific type, but this category of incident moving forward. But it requires you to be up to date and feeding that information as quickly as possible to your management. And NetSec at Reddit is pretty good. They tend to be very, very, very techy. But then I mean they get into like 0 days and exploits and how they work, and then also just on Twitter following a handful of people, and
so
then finally Internet Storm Center.
It seems like kind of the job is to translate it into something
exactly.
Judge your audience, right? Tailor it to your audience.
Because they might be like reading that stuff and go, like because they can't follow that stuff on Twitter necessarily.
No.
Yeah, it's like poof.
No.
But after you can translate it, it's helpful.
It's like our never-ending fight. Like we do executive summaries, and we're always trying to tune and refine our executive summaries. And the executive summary should have the why do you care factor. And it just can't be like, well, we've got an Apache Struts vulnerability and people can hack our servers. That's not telling someone why they should care.
And an executive doesn't.
They don't even know what Apache or Struts.
The words.
The CIO of Equifax has stepped down. That's something that translates easily.
If you say we have a vulnerability and can directly lead to access of these sensitive documents or data in our organization, that's the why do I care factor. But then you always give them what is the lever that they can pull to help you.
That's one of your constant mantras. What's the lever?
Okay. If we have a limited budget for hardware, what's the best placement for network taps, specifically to address proper NAT translation for SD MAC IP addresses?
So whenever you're dealing with the, you want to go right pre-NAT. So you're going to have your firewall that does the network address translation. You can actually buy all kinds of different taps online. It depends on what type of bandwidth you're dealing with. We have 10 gig taps. We have 1 gig taps. We have 100 megabit taps. They're simple shark taps. Just go on eBay and say, or not eBay, go on Amazon and say tap in your network speed, and then you're going to pull up tons of taps. They get really expensive once you start getting into 10 gigs and over. And you also need to make sure the interface matches up. If you're working with fiber, you need to make sure it's gonna work out properly. If you're using something like a Gigamon, you're already gonna have that port that you can plug into and you can go off that. But it needs to be pre-network address translation, so you can see the internal IP address, the RFC 1918 IP addresses, so you can see which systems are communicating outbound with other computer systems.
Here's a good general one from Frank. What recommendations do you have for key principles or fundamental components to focus on for an organization designing an internal penetration testing program?
I would say start with your most critical assets and work down. What is most sensitive, most important?
Prioritize.
Yeah, and then just basically do a circle and start with your most critical apps and data, and then say this is what we're going to do the first 2 months, and then draw another circle out, what's next, and work your circle out. If your organization can't do that, if they can't do that kind of bullseye kind of chart of what's critical and what's less critical, if they're like everything's critical everywhere, you need to step back.
If everything's important,
nothing's important. Yeah.
Any recommendations for free or affordable insider threat monitoring?
Well, we just did that webcast. What was the name of it? The one where...
Commercial break.
Yeah, commercial break. We just did a webcast where it was DAD, the DAD webcast.
Oh, Active DAD. The last one we did. Or no, not the last one.
2 times ago.
Yeah, but it's on our YouTube.
Yeah, so it's Active DAD, and basically it's all about creating fake accounts in Active Directory with no login hours, and then also creating fake shares and files. So if a user that's an insider grabs those files, then you're going to be able to track who opened it up. And we started that at Northrop years ago.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Jason asks, do you run any type of API testing or third-party solutions?
I don't understand.
API tests within a webcast? Yeah, we check those within a web application pen test.
Yeah, and if there's some APIs like JSON, RESTful APIs, we test those, but I don't know the second part of the question.
Okay, well, Jason, if you want to ask it, flesh that out, you can. So Alan says, besides the CIS critical security control spreadsheet, is there another solution for documenting?
So CIS is great for the individual host, right? But whenever you work up, we really recommend the Center for Internet Security's critical controls and the audit scripts that we've talked about many times, that James and Kelly Torala and Enclave. They have some amazing spreadsheets for overall architectural security that you really need to be working. All right, we got to get through the rest of the slides, though. So
we're done.
That's it.
Last one is resources.
Woo! PHAS.
I put us first.
Commercial
I
break.
think we're the best.
So,
yeah, we like us a lot, so you should call
CIS,
us.
since I used their stuff to make this presentation, I gave them the nod. All these things are good. Like I said, don't recreate the wheel. Find best practice. Take from what other people have gotten. It's been done before, generally.
Yeah, more often than not.
But it's a lot of hard work. The first thing you do, like I said, you want to pass it, up your password complexity and the length of those passwords. That's the first thing I do, other than patch. Please patch.
If you had to come up with a list of things, patching is, of course, at the very top. We found out in the past few breaches that patching is one of the reasons why the breaches happen. Long passwords, firewalls on your workstations are huge as well. Two-factor authentication. Get those things in play, and you've just made everybody's life a lot more difficult.
Very difficult.
All right, questions? Are we? Apparently we have a meeting in 9 minutes.
So Tim says, what are some good sources of threat intelligence specific to an organization? I know this can be very broad, but do you have any recommendations? What are your thoughts on threat intel from dark web sources? Would using criminal forums be sketchy proposition for a source of information?
God, okay.
I think he thinks yes.
I think
Prepare for rant.
So he's trying to set me up. I think I've been set up. So the dark web stuff is crap. It's not like all of the hackers get together from Russia on a dark web.
What should
forum
we do
looking for the
next?
government.
Well, Natasha.
What are we going to do tonight? It's the same thing we do every night, trying to take over the world. If you're
How are we going to do it, John?
Where are we going to get pantyhose and 20 feet of tube this late at night? But honestly, whenever you're looking at it, if you're worried about DDoS attacks from anonymous, then great. That's go there, because that's where you're going to get great intel. If you're worried about targeted nation-state attackers coming after you, they don't get together on dark forums like Mos Eisley in a cantina.
It's not a movie, you guys.
It's not a movie. It doesn't work that way. However, threat intelligence, I think that specific threat intelligence on specific actors is garbage and trash. However, the techniques matter. So check out the MITRE attack framework and go to the techniques matrix. The techniques matrix has a tremendous amount of resources about what techniques attackers use. Well, there's an infinite combination of those techniques used by an infinite number of attackers. The actual techniques in that matrix is relatively static. So start there, the MITRE attack matrix, techniques matrix, sorry.
Okay, so Rick says, Tim says thanks. He did. I think he did set you up because he said grabs popcorn. But then he said thanks. Okay, so Rick says, for your situational awareness regarding the implementation of secure configuration baselines, Microsoft provides for free desired state configuration and their DSC environment analyzer that both work with PowerShell. With PowerShell provided and is an open source, it's available on both Microsoft Windows and non-Windows operating systems. Thus, implementing secure configurations can be done with better logic and central management than before. Alternatively, a pen tester could have also easily leverage this tool to their advantage. I guess that wasn't really a question.
It was more of a comment. But we read the whole thing.
But I like
That's
it.
good.
Whew, that was that.
I think it sounds good.
Yes.
A mouthful.
Next comment.
All right. Frank says, what do frameworks or otherwise do you guys use for API testing?
Whenever we're doing API testing, predominantly, we have a webcast dedicated to this topic. So
many webcasts.
Pen test preparations, mobile application security assessment. So whenever we're doing a mobile application security assessment, we go back to OWASP. OWASP actually has an entire guide dedicated starting point for mobile application assessment. So that's your best framework to start there. And then a lot of the process actually, not all of it, but a lot of the process actually follows the same that we would do with a web application in a browser. You set up a proxy, you intercept the data, you decode the data, you monitor the data, and then you start basically tampering and manipulating.
Yep.
Cool. Well, it looks like we answered all the questions.
That's it.
We do have one more that just came in.
Spoiler alert.
Jeopardy says, can you talk a little bit about how you determine the maturity of a team's detective security controls using something like C2 pivot test? Is it just pass fail?
No,
There's
it's
no
always
pass fail.
It's always so two things that we want to happen is one, we want to bypass, and then the other thing is we want to be caught. And the reason why we want to do those two things is we want to find the endpoints, right? We want to find the tuning points. So where does the security start to fail and where is it actually working? And then once we find that detective point, then you can actually give people recommendations on what they can do to get better. Because unfortunately, we have some customers that don't detect anything. It's like, we're running full Nessa scans on your entire environment. You don't detect anything. Why is this happening? And they're like, well, we didn't know that we need that. They're like, wow, our SIM is lit up like a Christmas tree. We should be watching this thing more.
It's all
and
red,
then you have some organizations that they detect everything. They're like, you just started a command prompt. You just ran PowerShell. You just did this. You just did this.
Back to Derek Griffin.
Yeah, and that's cool, right? But you do wonder from time to time, is that something that they're detecting because they would detect it all the time, or are they detecting it because they're watching your system that closely?
So Ian says, are there good resources for incident breach postmortems and analysis and or pen testing reports that are publicly available? I'm just gathering ideas.
There is. I got to find it, but Bo shared out a link. There's a GitHub page where somebody took a whole bunch of sample reports from pen testing firms and threw them all up on GitHub.
Wow.
Now that's stuff that they're giving away for free. I mean,
Because it's samples.
with sample reports, you can't actually hold their feet to the fire.
Just to prepare. Oh, here it is.
I would do a search on Git.
Tim just shared it.
Okay, if you can
So
paste that out
I'm
to everybody.
sending it all.
That's so awesome. Our
what's the-
listeners do
what's
the
the-
webcast for us.
What's the Verizon report?
Oh, the data breach report,
Yeah.
the Mandiant reports.
Yeah.
Yes, there's reports all the time about this stuff. I think it's the construction next door.
Oh my gosh.
So good thing we're almost done.
And our last question is from Jason. How can I be as cool as you guys?
You already are.
You already are. You be you, man.
You be the best version of you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining. Thank you, CJ, for coming up. It was super fun.
Wasn't that painful?
I
The
bet
rum
he's-
helped.
I bet he's wearing pants, so he's already a step ahead of me. So yeah,
Oh,
that's
wow.
nice.
Okay. He's wearing shorts again. He is
I was
wearing...
gonna run today, and that didn't work out. So yeah.
Okay, cool. I have some... So that's the end of our webcast.